Hi, I'm Stephanie, and for my research I've been looking at images of miscegenation in film, and I wanted to see if there were changes in these images throughout the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. So I ended up examining 6 different films, 3 of which show miscegenation between Indians and whites, and 3 which show between African Americans and whites, and I found some differences in the way the images are presented. The first film that I looked at was Broken Arrow from 1950, where we have a young Indian girl who eventually marries the white male main character. Broken Arrow is often viewed as very progressive because it shows a positive depiction of Native Americans, and it was considered ahead of its time because it was produced before many of the changes that occurred during the civil rights movement had taken place. Despite its positive portrayal of Indians, however, Sunseri is made out to be very special in order to justify her relationship with Tom. She's extremely young, she's pure, she's given this high social standing presented with goddess-like qualities, and she also has a willingness to assimilate to white Western culture. And of course the relationship between them isn't allowed to last throughout the end of the film. In fact, not only does Sunseri die following a long tradition of white Indian relationships in film, but her death is actually necessary for the white male to succeed in achieving peace between whites and Apaches. In 1956, The Searchers comes out, and it's especially interesting to look at this film because many scholars agree that Native American images were used during this time period to represent how people were feeling about African Americans and civil rights. In The Searchers, we're presented with a young, innocent white girl who is taken captive by the evil Comanche Indians. The white hero, John Wayne's character Ethan, makes his view about the possibility of Debbie marrying an Indian quite clear in this scene.
These are my people. Und mehr. Go. Go, Martin, please.
Stand aside, Martin.
Ethan would rather kill her than let her live among the Indians. Of course, the film ends happily with Debbie deciding to return to white civilization. Interestingly, we see another depiction of miscegenation in this film as well, between Martin and an Indian woman who he accidentally buys. He doesn't want anything to do with her, though, and the relationship, including his abuse of her, is presented as comedy. Little Big Man from 1970 shows a very positive portrayal of Indians, and in addition, it also presents their culture as an alternative way of life rather than as a sort of primitive world. Jack is married first to Olga, a white woman, and then later to Sunshine, the Indian girl, and his marriage with Sunshine is depicted as happier than his marriage with Olga, which defies traditional stereotypes. Also, Olga is later living with Younger Bear, an Indian man, and the miscegenation is allowed, but the marriage is unhappy. However, Olga, the white woman, is presented as the unfit partner rather than the colored man. Unfortunately, the film does follow the traditional pattern of killing off the colored girl before the end, when Sunshine dies. Still, though, the film has a remarkably different portrayal of Indians and miscegenation than earlier films did. So, on to images of African American and white miscegenation. In 1951, we get Showboat, which takes place in the late 19th century when miscegenation was still illegal. And it's discovered that one of the female performers on the boat, Julie, is actually half black, half white, and passing as white, and she's married to a white man, Steve. The couple is essentially cast off the ship, and Steve later leaves Julie because of the difficulties they face trying to hide Julie's race. Although the film attempts to take a stance against racial discrimination, it ultimately sends the message that miscegenation won't work. In 1967, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner became probably the first film which allows miscegenation between African Americans and whites. It's also interesting because early miscegenation laws in America forbade black men from having sex with white women, but not the other way around. When the laws were created, if mixed-race children were born to a black woman, they would automatically be born into slavery, so the whites didn't really mind. But if a white woman gave birth to a mixed-race child, the child would be born free, which was a problem because they believed that it was a contamination of white purity. In the film, Joanna and John are happy, in love, and with some difficulty, the marriage is allowed in the end. It's made clear that their relationship isn't going to be easy, especially with the question that is repeatedly asked throughout the film.
Have you given any thought to the problems your children are going to have?
Still, though, for the first time, the relationship is allowed, and it's also expected to last, which is a remarkable feat in film during this time period, and the civil rights movement allowed it to occur. Moving on to 1970 once more, The Great White Hope is about a black man who is a very successful boxer, and who also happens to have a white girlfriend. He is persecuted because of the relationship, and eventually the stress of living with such discrimination causes he and his girlfriend to fight, and the girl ends up committing suicide. To the film's credit, its message is forcibly against racism, and it blames the inability of miscegenation to work on racism. But even so, its refusal to allow a mixed-race couple to have a lasting relationship takes away from its progressiveness. Ultimately, there were changes in images of miscegenation throughout the civil rights movement. Images became more positive, and they began to fight traditional stereotypes which had been reinforced in film for years. While not all films after the 1960s which depicted miscegenation showed a happy, plausibly long-term relationship, the civil rights movement made it possible for positive images to be depicted in movies, like in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and it also made it possible for these movies to be successful. Thanks.